Look in the mirror tomorrow morning. Run your hand across your jaw. If you're a man, you might feel stubble, or a full beard, or the smooth skin left behind by a razor. Either way, you're touching something strange, something that shouldn't be there. Humans are famous for losing their fur. Every textbook says the same thing. Naked skin was the great human innovation. So why does one patch of that skin still grow a thick mat of hair on half the species for their entire adult lives? The real answer is far stranger than it just grew there. Start with the basic mystery. Somewhere between 1 and 3 million years ago, your ancestors lost the coat that every other primate still wears. Chimpanzees have it, gorillas have it. You don't. Your body is covered in millions of tiny hair follicles, almost as many as a chimp has, but most of them now produce hairs so fine and short, they're basically invisible. Scientists call this vellus hair. It's a leftover instruction, still being followed, just quietly.
This wasn't a small adjustment. It was one of the most dramatic transformations in the entire primate lineage. No other ape went bare. No other close relative traded its coat for naked skin. Something about the environment, or the behavior, or the social world of early humans made that trade worth it, even though it came with real costs. Bare skin burns easily. It's more vulnerable to cuts, to cold nights, to insect bites. Evolution doesn't remove a trait unless keeping it costs more than losing it. So the fur had to go for a reason strong enough to outweigh all of that. And yet, walk into any room of adult men and you'll see the exceptions standing right there on their faces. Not everywhere. Not on your scalp, not in your armpits or groin. And on men, not on the face. Why would evolution spend millions of years stripping the body bare, then leave one region conspicuously covered? That question sat mostly unanswered for over a century, ever since Charles Darwin first tried to explain it. Darwin was obsessed with beards. In his 1871 book, The Descent of Man, he argued that human hairlessness itself was driven by something he called sexual selection, not survival.
Not temperature, attraction. Darwin believed that at some point, ancestral humans began to prefer partners with less body hair, and over many generations, that preference reshaped the species. But he hit a problem he couldn't fully explain. If bare skin was the preferred trait, why did the beard survive? Why would one visible, obvious patch of hair be kept, even amplified, while the rest of the body went smooth? Here's where the story gets interesting. For decades after Darwin, scientists leaned toward a different, more practical theory. Losing body hair, they argued, was about heat. Your ancestors were shifting from forest to open savanna, walking longer distances under direct sun, hunting during the hottest hours of the day. A hairless body sweats more efficiently. Sweat evaporates faster off bare skin, and that evaporation is what cools you down. A furry chimpanzee overheats far more easily doing the exact same activity a human does comfortably. So the theory made sense. Nakedness was a cooling system. Anthropologist Nina Jablonski has spent much of her career studying exactly this. Her research connects the loss of body hair to the evolution of skin itself, and to something you don't usually think about: your sweat glands. Jablonski's work shows that as hair disappeared, your ancestors developed a far higher density of eccrine sweat glands than any other primate,
Turning the human body into one of the most efficient cooling machines in the animal kingdom. That's a real advantage. That's the kind of trait natural selection keeps.
Think about what that actually meant for daily survival. A hairless, heavily sweating body could chase prey across open ground for hours, long after a furred predator had to stop and rest in the shade. Some researchers argue this endurance advantage is part of why early humans became such effective persistence hunters, wearing down faster animals simply by outlasting them under the sun. Bare skin wasn't a weakness on the savanna. It was an engine.
But an engine needs protection where it matters most. Your brain sits just behind your face, and it's remarkably sensitive to overheating. Some researchers have floated the idea that scalp hair stuck around specifically to shield the skull from direct sun exposure, insulating the one organ your ancestors absolutely could not afford to cook. That would explain the scalp. It doesn't explain the jaw.
But cooling doesn't explain the beard. If anything, a beard works against cooling. It traps heat around the face and neck, right near blood vessels close to the surface of the skin. So whatever kept the beard alive, it wasn't temperature regulation. It had to be something else, something that made the cost worth paying. This is where Darwin's instinct turns out to be closer to correct than the sweat gland story alone can explain. Modern researchers picked the thread back up. Evolutionary psychologist Barnaby Dixson has run some of the most detailed studies on facial hair and human perception, using photographs of the same men, digitally shown clean-shaven, stubbled, and fully bearded, to test how people judge them. Across multiple studies, Dixon's research found that beards consistently shift how a face is perceived. Bearded faces are rated as older, more dominant, more aggressive-looking, and more socially mature than the same face without hair. Interestingly, the effect isn't simple. Heavy stubble often scored highest for attractiveness in Dixon's data, while full beards scored highest for perceived dominance and age. Different lengths were sending different signals. Think about what that means. A beard isn't just leftover hair, it's a broadcast. It tells other people something about you before you say a single word. Dixon didn't stop at attractiveness ratings. In follow-up work, he and his colleagues showed participants photographs of men's faces and simply asked them to guess the man's age, his strength, and how he'd behave in a conflict. Bearded faces were consistently guessed as older than they actually were. They were also rated as more capable of defending themselves and more likely to win a physical confrontation, regardless of the man's actual build. The beard itself was doing the persuading. The body underneath barely mattered to the perception. For most of human history, that broadcast mattered enormously. Picture a small group of early humans, 30 or 40 people, competing for status, for mates, for authority within the group. You couldn't check someone's resume. You couldn't scroll their profile. You had seconds to judge who was older, who was stronger, who had survived enough winters to be trusted. A beard was instant information. It signaled maturity without a word being spoken. Younger men typically grow thinner, patchier facial hair. Older men grow fuller coverage. That difference alone could separate a teenager from an established adult male at a glance. And that gap between boy and man mattered more than you might assume. In a world without birth certificates, without written records, without any formal way to prove your age or your standing, a visible marker of adulthood was valuable currency. It told rivals who not to challenge. It told potential mates who had already survived the most dangerous years of early adulthood. It told the group who was old enough to be trusted with responsibility. A face could lie about a lot of things. A beard, for most of history, could not. And there's a hormonal signature buried inside it, too. Facial hair growth is driven heavily by testosterone and its more potent derivative, dihydrotestosterone. A visible beard is, in a very real biological sense, a testosterone receipt. It's difficult to fake. You can't simply decide to grow a fuller beard through willpower alone. The hair follicles on a man's face respond to years of hormonal exposure, which makes a beard a surprisingly honest signal, the evolutionary version of a signature that's hard to forge. That honesty is exactly what sexual selection tends to favor. Traits that are costly or hard to fake become the traits that stick around because they can't be cheated. A peacock's tail works the same way. It's expensive to grow, awkward to carry, and impossible to counterfeit, which is precisely why it became such a reliable signal of health and genetic quality. A beard isn't as extreme, but the underlying logic matches. It stayed, not despite being costly, but partly because it was. So the beard wasn't an accident left behind when the rest of the body went bare. If beards were purely about signaling dominance and maturity, you'd expect every culture, everywhere,
to prize them equally. They don't. Preferences for facial hair shift dramatically across history and geography. Some societies have prized full beards as marks of wisdom and status. Others have prized clean-shaven faces as marks of discipline and civilization. Roman soldiers were famously required to shave, partly so enemies couldn't grab a beard in close combat. Meanwhile, in other eras, a bare face was seen as unfinished, even childish.
The follicles never changed. What changed was the meaning humans decided to attach to them. That's the deeper truth hiding underneath this whole question. Evolution built the capacity. Culture decided what to do with it. Your body still carries the machinery for growing a dense, visible beard. The same machinery your distant male ancestors used to signal age and status around a fire tens of thousands of years ago.
Whether you shave it off every morning or let it grow for months is no longer a biological decision at all. It's a cultural one, layered on top of a signal that's been running since long before anyone had a word for masculinity or status or attraction. And that's what makes the mirror stranger than it looks.
Every time a man picks up a razor, or decides not to, he's making a choice inside a conversation that started somewhere on the plains of prehistoric Africa. The hair on his jaw isn't a mistake evolution forgot to erase. It's one of the last visible instructions your ancestors ever wrote on your body, still being read, still being interpreted every single day by people who have no idea they're reading it at all. So look in the mirror again. Run your hand across your jaw. What you're touching isn't leftover fur. It's a signal, older than language, still being sent.